So this is 40.3 things that I've learned in doing my podcast in 5 minutes. You may only have one chance to make a good impression. So you've got to make your podcast as best as you can right from the start. Record your audio as clean and best as possible. Echo, reverb, noise. People chatting apart from your guest are your enemies. Don't record your podcast in a busy cafe or a busy co-working space or the gents' toilets, unless your podcast really is about cafe or toilets. Value your podcast guests' time. We want to hear them properly and value the listeners and their time. These are great for acoustics. So are these. These just stink of eggs and they look pretty cheap. I use loads of these kind of bits of equipment to record. These are really good, these Audio-Technica, because actually the mic's there right by the mouth. Problem is you kind of look like an American sports commentator or you're about to land a plane. Yeah, but I recorded my first ever podcast doing these, just lying flat out on a hotel bed with a pint beside me, and it sounded great. This is our current kind of setup, and we've got two RØDE Procaster microphones. This Podcaster by RØDE is absolutely ace. I do love it. I really love it. My wife isn't happy about that. I can't believe I actually got my wife to take that shot just this morning. She was like, that is not funny. Always look to improve the quality of your podcast. I'm about 90% happy with mine and I'm 17 episodes in. Get personal with your marketing. Market the hell out of your podcast. I messaged everyone I knew individually about my podcast, getting them to subscribe, rate and review. Everyone on Twitter, WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, my Facebook groups, my mailing list. I even did fax. And yes, it took hours and hours, and eventually, well, it was about 3 weeks marketing my podcast when it first launched. And it's actually just creating momentum, because momentum is really effective, and it creates that kind of compounding effect. I did actually lose a few Facebook friends as I hounded them so many times. Even my mum now refuses to talk to me about my podcast. Use your kids if you have some. They're quite good for making kind of podcast stings. And obviously it's free. And you can get them to do free marketing as well. But don't let them operate the controls. That's really bad. This kind of person really annoys me. They say, oh, the podcast is really great, but they don't end up leaving a review. Hound them. Go after them. Get them a review. Try not to cough into a microphone. It really hurts the other person's podcast ears. And plus, I don't want your germs. Don't invite your wife on a podcast. They ask really awkward questions. These are quite good plugins. This one is Sibilance for the sort of pops and the S's, really good. This is good for removing echo and reverb. This one is really good for removing noise. Audacity is still a really good free audio editor. I use Logic to do mine. I use Buzzsprout as my podcast host. For stock music, I use Artlist and Soundstripe. Offer prizes and freebies to people to leave good reviews. Basically, you bribe them. Film your podcast, because it gives you stacks more kind of material and content to put out there, and people can see your lovely face. Choose categories on Apple Podcasts that aren't super competitive. Apple Podcasts apparently gives you 8 weeks to make an impact. I concentrated all my initial marketing efforts on Apple Podcasts. So basically, I unfriended all the people that had Androids. I even once charted for about 1 minute above Russell Brand in the charts, and more importantly, above Gemma Collins. Sharing a podcast episode via Spotify and Instagram stories is really easy. You should do it, and people engage with it, which is great. There is an immense power in audio. Use it wisely, because you never know who is listening. And I know BBC producers are, because one got in touch with me, liked my voice, liked my style, invited me to pitch an idea, and it was commissioned. Hooray! Thanks, Ed Richmond and Jeremy Grange and Colin. So there's a kindness doc coming on BBC this year. You never know who's actually listening and the positive impact that it might actually make. So I put my first ever podcast out on SoundCloud about a year ago, and there's this commercial pilot in Dubai who's listening to my first podcast because he knew the adventurer, ex-fighter jet pilot, on the first podcast. And he ended up listening to the second podcast, which was all about this photographer who uses his time and skills for charities around the world. He got in touch with me and said, I'm really impressed by what Adam does. Can you give me his contact details? I didn't know what happened after this. Nick got in touch with Adam and said, how can I help? He started donating money to him every single month. And he donated so much money to Adam. Adam was then able to buy a really high-end digital SLR camera, and he donated it to Gene out in Uganda, who had a crappy camera. Gene in Uganda was then able to take amazing photos for the project, but also importantly, earn money as a freelancer. And I didn't know about this until a couple of months ago. Adam told me about this story. He said Gene has earned so much money because of this camera. He's now bought his own plot of land and is building his house on it for his family. So my podcast inadvertently helped a man buy some land for a family out in Uganda, in Africa, and I'm happy with that. Subscribe, rate, and review, obviously, or we're breaking up. Thanks for watching. 5 minutes.